Today we're going to try and repair the Lemax Dr. Stretch and Pull's Torture Factory. This was a request that we received. This was on the docket to get repaired. It doesn't function like it's supposed to. Turn it on.
Welcome to Dr. Stretch and Pull's Torture Factory, where we love to help whip you into shape.
It might be hard to tell, but the only thing working is the guy in the middle spinning. Gears aren't spinning, door's not opening, guillotine's not moving. Lights work though, so does the volume and the voice. But, yeah, you can see nothing wants to work. So, we're going to open this thing up and see if we can find out what is causing all the other equipment to fail, except for the rotating guy in the middle. So, let's see what we can find out. Okay, well, we've turned off the power, turned the bench light back on. First thing we have to do, like on most all Lemax, is remove the bottom. Which apparently is a lot easier, since it has been removed once before. Apparently the new resin didn't hold. But underneath the rubber mat is a hard plastic plate. You can see the outline right here where it sits inside. It's generally held in with hot glue or heat sensitive resin. Take a look inside and see if I can notice anything. Need a little light. All right. Okay. Alright, well, as far as the reason the gears don't go, the belt's broke. That one's pretty obvious. It's hard to see. You won't be able to see far enough inside on the camera. You see all the way down inside. But we'll be taking it apart. As far as the guillotine, apparently this guillotine has been modified by somebody else to no longer function. It's not attached to anything inside, and it's kind of stuck in one spot. It's been glued right here, and it kind of looks like something's missing right in here, which is probably the pulley system for the guillotine, which is sitting right here. So that might be the cause for that. We're going to go into this a little further, take it apart. I would recommend that you have a heat gun, because the only way to get inside this once you pop the bottom is behind these two guards. There's a Phillips screw on each side. If you use a heat gun, you can break the resin. So I'm going to fire up mine right now. I have this one set at 250 degrees Celsius, and I'm just going to sweep the bottom of the feet where the resin is and slowly heat it up. One. I'll tip it. Might make it a little easier to see. And as I'm sweeping it, I'm slowly moving the character back and forth to try and break them free. And there's two. All right. Right there, right there are your Phillips screws. They are number 2 Phillips. And you can see that the assembly there is starting to drop. Butterfingers. These are rather long screws, and they have 2 plastic spacers which rest against the front of the castle. Set them out, set them aside. Turn on the heat gun again. Alright. Slowly trying to walk it out and get it off the circuit board, which just has a small dab of glue in the corner that I just popped out. Take your time and carefully find a position to do this so you don't break any of the wires. And this guy right here, you can see here's the drive belt, which makes the wheel spin. And this little motor here is what's supposed to make the gate go up and down. I'm going to unplug it from the circuit board. It just has a little flat connector there and another 2 connector here. Then a really cheap wiring connection there that somebody fixed apparently. So, a closer look. Flat pancake motor, what makes this thing spin. The little hobby motor is what makes it go up and down, and then it uses little switches that when they get touched, stop and change the direction of your door. So if your door doesn't go up or down and you want to take this apart, this one's a little harder since you have to delaminate the characters. Check your joints, see if these are broken, and then check your motor. We'll check all that since this doesn't go up or down. I mean, it does move freely, it just does not move under its own power. And you can see when it goes all the way up, it does make contact. When it goes all the way down, it does make contact. Let's see what's under this tape. Apparently soldered connections. So this little motor here is soldered right in here. Might be hard to see. Try and tip it a little. And it's a pretty crappy tape job. Solder looks to be pretty decent, but should have been connected with electrical tape or even heat shrink. What we're going to do is we are going to snip these so we can remove this pod, and we'll just repair it when we reassemble. So here's the pod, completely separate. You got a flat 6, a 2, and 2 wires that were soldered that branch off to the motor up here, so they're always spinning. And when we put it back together, we'll fix it the correct way. This belt still has got good tension. Considering he still spins, we know it's not slipping. Alright, so here is the inside. Get a little light in there. All the way down here is the drive motor for the gears on the outside. Right here is your LED cluster for the fiber optics. And this had a repair where it has 2 smaller LEDs, or it's actually probably just been replaced. The fitting inside shows for 2 smaller LEDs, which are 3mm and 1 5mm LED. The fitting is actually set for that, but they've been replaced or repaired at some point. But our big issue right now is we need to get all the way down to the bottom, which technically is the top, to make these outer gears spin again, so they can all do their job. Well, there's the drive belt. So it's broke. Nothing lasts forever. Here's a replacement one. I have lots of parts to try and fix these. Fun part is trying to get this to go on. Unless you got really small hands or you really go with long tweezers. This is a kind of a chore. You can unscrew the assembly. If you look all the way down in there, you might be able to see some screws. I wouldn't recommend it because you'll lose all your gears. It's kind of a pain to put back together. I'm just going to check this belt to see if it's decent, because I do have a few more if not. This is one size bigger. This one might work better. I think the reason it broke is this belt is technically too short for it. A lot of people ask where I get parts like belts and motors and gears to fix these as they break, and honestly I just scavenge them from other electronics that have died. Old VCRs, old Walkman, CD players, radios. I tear stuff apart all the time to take the components out. When you have a hobby that includes these little porcelain houses or even resin houses and they're animatronic, they don't sell replacement parts for them unless you can find another one that you can take to and make one functional one out of it. So my suggestion, anybody who wants to fix these themselves, is find some electronics and disassemble it. Do the way of, well, the 1980s MacGyver. Take stuff that isn't supposed to be there and make it work. So, I am now going to try and get in here and fix this. I'm just assessing how, and I'm going to use some small needle nose. It's probably not going to be a fast process, only for the fact that it is a tight area. Unless you got small hands, and you might be able to get it easier. The pulley on the motor is this way, the pulley on the drive gear is this way, so you have to snake it around and then slip it over. Don't get too frustrated if you can't do it. Stop. Don't throw the house. They don't make it anymore. So I'll be back in a few moments, because I guarantee you this is going to take a couple of minutes and I don't want to waste your time. Alright, we're back. I did have to remove this. Main reason is the belt. The front of that motor is so close I could not get the belt in there. After 15 minutes of screwing around with it, there's 4 screws. 1, 2, 3, 4. Used a long, thin number 2 electronic screwdriver. Reach all the way in there. Unscrew it. Slide the belt over the pulley of the motor, the pancake motor. It's right there. And then let it hang off to the side and drop this back in, and then screw it in, and then use a pair of thin needle nose, whether they're offset or standard, to pull it over. But I just cannot get the belt over the 2 pulleys fully assembled. So 4 screws, long thin screwdriver, remove the 4 screws, use a magnetic one so when you put it back in, the screws aren't falling out all over the place. So, be back in just a moment. We're going to reassemble this. Okay, she's back together. The 4 screws are in, the gearbox is in, and the pulley is on. So, there you go. So, now these are spinning like they're supposed to. Check the fiber optics, make sure none of that's been damaged. Apparently I lost the word torture. And apparently the LED in here is not functioning. So the eyes are working, but the word torture is not flashing anymore. These things are very sensitive. So, let's see if we can find out what happened. Turn the volume off. Alright, we're gonna see if we got power going to it or if one of the wires broke. getting any juice. What I'm doing right now is I'm just tracing the wires. Looking for a break. Oh, there's a break. Unfortunately, the wires they use in these are so thin and sensitive, it's really easy to damage them. You just have to have patience. Take your time. And then now the torcher is lit up. So we will fix that broken wire when we reassemble the pod. Since we'll do all the heat shrinking and soldering at the same time. So now that we got the gears turning, that's one problem solved, and we'll continue on to the next. Next is the pod. Why does the pod only function part way? So we're going to plug the pod in. These two wires are for the motor that spins the wheel. So when I turn it on, it will not spin. So we got the lights, and hey, apparently the problem is looks like a loose wire or a bad switch. We're gonna let it go through its thing and see if it opens and closes like it's supposed to. This might take a moment, because it only opens and closes about every minute. Okay, we're going to let it go through one more cycle just to make sure. Alright, so apparently the problem is right here. These contacts, all I did was bump them with my finger, and now the gate's working. Well, I've separated them to ensure that they're not touching. We're going to try it one more time. Up. Down. So, on your, as I refer to, your gate pod, if your gate's not opening and closing, check the micro switches. Make sure there's a gap between them. This one was apparently touching, so it was always thinking it was closed. It won't open because this changes the direction of the motor. If those all look good, you can always voltage test them if you have a voltmeter or a multimeter. It is DC, so just put on DC volts. If that doesn't work, you can check this motor. This motor is getting 4.5 volts, but you can actually just hit it with 3 volts if you have a volt power supply, a voltage power supply, just to see if it works. It is reverse polarity, so if you go this one hot, this one ground, it'll go one direction and vice versa. Don't overdo it. If you directly power this motor, these safety stops won't turn it off and you can strip the gears. One thing you can do is unscrew the screws, which there is 4 of them. Pull the motor assembly out and then test it. The motor is held in with 2 small screws on the front side between these pieces of plastic. Next thing to check if this isn't opening and closing is see if any of the teeth are stripped on any of the gears. If they are, you have to replace the gears. Again, I take my gears out of old electronics and I just have literal containers full of gears in varying sizes and pancake motors and small hobby motors from old remote control cars, even those old fiber optic lamps that had a spinning wheel inside of them. So if your table's not turning, which we know this one does, I just have the motors disconnected, see if the belt's broke. If the belt's broke, replace the belt. If not, that pulley drives a worm gear, which is down in here, which again might be somewhat hard to see. And that worm gear then drives a stack of other gears, which goes to this one right here, which then turns the tortured guy on his torture wheel. Most likely what's going to happen is if your wheel quits turning, the probabilities of you just getting a gear broke is pretty slim unless this is an extreme heat. It's probably going to be your belt. You can use like a small horse tie or horsehair tie rubber band, or find a belt out of electronics of an equivalent size. If the belt's broke, hold them together, the 2 pieces, to get an approximate diameter. I'd say you can go to places like Radio Shack, but since most of them are gone, you're probably not going to find them. If you go on eBay and try and buy a belt, you usually have to buy like hundreds of them at a time. And unless it's a variety pack, probably not worth it. Somebody has an old Walkman, cassette player, CD player, VCR, Betamax, because any of those, they have lots of drive belts on them of varying sizes. Just be creative. If you like your piece, you should be able to find something. So far, we've solved most of the issues. The problem that we're going to have is this one doesn't have a working guillotine. Somebody else has apparently cut out the gear system for the guillotine. I am going to assume, just based on the casting and years of working with electronics and mechanical electronics like this, where it's electronics that run mechanical devices, most likely the guillotine system was right here. This casting is absolutely pointless unless your gear system or pulley system is for the guillotine right here. This rope has been cut and then hot glued, and that hole right there indicates that there was a drive pin for a pulley or a gearbox. If your guillotine doesn't work and you know it worked in the past, probably a belt in here that broke, or the motor died, or it's a gear. I'm going to assume, based on the size of this, it was probably a pancake motor. I could be wrong since this one doesn't have it. I can't tell you. I have not opened any other ones of this model. But step 1, you have to de-resin your little guys here. Take out the screws after you remove the bottom. So your first step after the bottom technically would be screws, pull the pot out carefully, unplug it. If these wires are soldered like this one was, you can still pull it out and have it hanging off at an angle like so. Make sure none of these wires are broke. That could be another issue, as what happened with the lighting right here. The wires broke. These are really flimsy wires. My wire stripper doesn't even go to a gauge this small, and it goes down to 26. So it's pretty thin stuff. Make sure the wires aren't broke off the motor. If it's a pulley drive, check your pulley. Check your gears. Check your teeth. I'm assuming there's this little piece of frayed rope that's in here. Probably was much longer and was probably wrapped around a a pulley or a very interesting cogged gear. So when you take this out, you probably have to be careful that you don't break this. And so this one doesn't move up or down because they have apparently glued it in place. So, but this is a very animated system, very sensitive. Try not to break the fiber optic cluster that's in the bottom when you're working on it. You can get fiber optic on eBay, you can get fiber optic in other places. It's just a pain to run. So the cluster of fiber optics right down here. If you're working on this gearbox, just move it along, move it to the side. It does move, and you should be good. Try not to break the cluster or the bundle. So what we're going to do next is I'm going to fire up the soldering iron. We're going to get ready to fix these wires the correct way, slide it back together, and make sure it works fully assembled in its housing before we re-adhere the torture masters onto the front. So, be back in a few moments once we get the soldering stuff set up. Okay, we got solder, lead based. We got itty bitty, very small gauge heat shrink, and a soldering iron that's running. I have it set for about 325 degrees centigrade or Celsius. You can run them a little cooler or a little hotter. You just want to make sure that you don't prolong your time and melt the wires. These are really thin. I like to run them a little hot so that way I get a good melt. So strip back some of the wire so you have some copper showing, which is really hard to see because it's really small wire. What we're going to do is we're going to tin these wires, which is basically getting solder on the copper. These are actually copper. So that way I can stick them onto the wires that are still inside the house. Everybody has their own techniques. You can use helping hands if you got a set. Some people are familiar with them. If you're not, you can try and hold it with your fingers. I'll just use these since I got them. And you want the solder to flow to the soldering iron. You don't want to just gob it on and then wipe it. And then off camera I have a cleaner. If you've never seen one, this one is just gets rid of the stuff off the tip. It's kind of like one of those scrubby sponges from for your dishes, your pots. You can also use a wetted sponge. I have one of those too. I just prefer the scrubber. This is flux cord solder, so I don't have to flux it, but I do have flux if I do run a non-flux solder. Now the ground wire that's in here that's broke for the LED is really short, so I can't show you, but I'm doing the same thing. I'm just tinning it and getting it set for reconnection. You can use electrical tape. You don't have to use heat shrink. You can use liquid electrical tape. This is the stuff I have. You can use masking tape if you want. Cellophane tape. Anything to insulate it so you don't ground out the 4.5 volt positive to anything that's ground or negative and damage the circuit board or burn the wires to that equipment. So I'm just going to slide on some pieces. And the reason I tin the wires first, because a lot of people won't tin them first, is so that way I don't have frayed wires and I'm bending out of the way when I slide the shrink tube over it. Now, inside again is really hard to see, and I apologize. I can't tip the house on its end or really adjust the camera too much. But I'm going to take this red wire and connect it to the red wire I cut earlier. Then I'm going to slide the heat shrink down over it, and then I'll use the heat gun again. So, re-wet solder. Hold it for a moment, and it's good to go. Slide that down. Now we're going to do the grounds. I'm going to ground this to the ground, and I got to re-ground the LED. I'm trying to pull them out a little bit so you can see them, but again, the positioning of this house and the way my workbench is set up, it's a little difficult to see. So if you've never soldered before, there's a lot of tutorials on YouTube that are very helpful. It's very easy. Just take your time. Don't slip. This will give you 3rd degree burns. I know. I've done it. So a lot of other people. It's the nature of the beast. Because this is partially inside, I don't want my hand blocking my view. I'm going to use a pair of pliers to keep it in alignment. I am going to re-wet the tip so I have good adhesion. Re-wetting the tip allows the heat of the soldering iron to transfer to the solder in the wires. And again, because of how small it is, it doesn't take a long duration. We're going to slide that back down. And put this away. Fire up the heater again. Just to be a little extra precautious, and I'm going to put a dab of liquid electrical tape. If you haven't ever used this stuff, it kind of reminds me of rubber contact cement. It has a very similar smell. And I'm only doing this because it's 3 wires soldered into one joint. We're going to let that harden. We'll be back. Okay, it's been a few minutes. Let the electrical tape get the liquid electrical tape get tacky, so that way it doesn't stick to you like that on my finger. And we're going to plug this all back in, make sure that it actually still works and we didn't break something else. These connectors, you can't put them in backwards. They have grooves on them. Alright. Gate works. You can see that motor spinning. And you can see he's spinning inside. Spinning motor. So, make sure that it opens and closes. Oops, thumb was in the way. Alright. got flashing lights. We got spinning wheels. I think we're good. So, we're gonna fire up a hot glue gun. You can use regular hot melt glue. I use a little bit stronger stuff. It's kind of got a little bit of resin type adherence. It has a higher heat. The smaller heat guns that use the really thin sticks are great, but when I do the houses, I want the thicker sticks, the more professional grade. This is an old Aero Electromatic. I've had this thing for, oh geez, 10, 15 years or more. Longer than I can remember. But it'll take the regular glue sticks, the upgraded glue sticks. It just won't take those thin ones. You can't use those hobby sticks. So you have to use the ones that are, no, they're about 1/3 of an inch, a little under. So this is what I use. It takes a moment to get hot. So while this is heating up, we're going to slide the pot in and get it screwed down. Carefully feed the pot in, being mindful of all the wires. Remember, they're very sensitive to breakage. What I would do is recommend is align it, get the thread started on one side, then do the other side, and walk it into position. We're only talking, these are plastic pieces in a porcelain house, so if you do it wrong, something's going to break. You're either going to break the plastic or you're going to break the porcelain. And what I'm doing is going back and forth, trying to pull it up more evenly. Try and center it in the door. Make sure it still works. On this one on the right, if you go too far in, you'll actually hit the gate. So when you tighten this one, make sure you don't wedge the gate. Okay, I got good clearance. And it's the pod's nice and secure. We still got all the lights, still got the upper gears. So now the circuit board just goes behind everything. That's where that was tacked. So take the glue gun and put a little dab of hot glue right here behind the pod. And then carefully slide the circuit board back in. Now, because I don't have the one with the working guillotine, I'm not sure if this would be in the way of the motor. you'd have to just align it where it was originally. Alright, sorry for the interruption. As you can tell, everything's tucked back in. The circuit board is just a little tap of glue right underneath it on the corner just to hold it behind. When you reassemble, make sure none of these loose wires that are all bunched in here are rubbing against any moving parts, such as the gears or the motor. And then take your base, run a bead on the flanged area. Set it inside, and you can use tacky stuff such as rubber contact cement. I usually just use a thin bead of hot glue around the edges to re-adhere the foam rubber mat. Some people prefer not even to put the mat back on. It's a preference. I try to put the mats back on because it does adjust the height of the house depending on how your display is set up. It's not a big height difference, but it's a height difference nonetheless. And last but not least, we have to glue on the two guys in the front. Of course, the guy with the axe in his left hand goes on the left side when you're staring at it. So, two little dabs of glue, line up his shoes, and just hold them. You can use super glue if you want. I prefer going back to glue in case you ever hot glue or a resin that's temperature sensitive, in case you ever have to take them back out to fix the belts. You always have to think about how you're going to repair it if and when it breaks again, because apparently this one's been worked on before. So these guys are set back in. Clear off the little glue strings. Close the cabinets. Alright. Now we'll see what it looks like in low light. There it is. Dr. Stretch and Pull's Torture Factory repaired to the best of its ability. The guillotine does not function since the parts are missing. If you do have the guillotine again, just refer back to earlier in the video about checking the pulley, belts, and wires. But as you can see, the gears in the upper top are turning. Right in there. The gate's moving up and down like it's supposed to. And the guy is spinning on the inside. All the lights are flashing on just like you're supposed to. And we'll tip it a little bit so I can get to the volume. And as you can hear, volume still works. So that'll conclude this episode of Lemax Repairs, Dr. Stretch and Pull's Torture Factory Teardown and Rebuild. Thank you.